In my last video, I showed you how to use Logic Pro as a sound module for the MPC software. In this video, I'll show you how to do the same with Ableton Live. So before I get started, I want to talk about what this workflow is. This workflow is set up to emulate a old school MPC workflow. For instance, in my original studio, my original music production studio, I had an MPC 2000 and a 2000 XL as the heart or the center of those studios. Basically, I used the MPC to sequence all of my other instruments that were in the studio. For instance, I had a Korg Triton, which was a keyboard workstation that had its own sequencer. I had a Roland JV1080, which was a sound module. I had a Yamaha Motif rack sound module. I also had a Proteus 2000 sound module and several other pieces of hardware that was in that studio. But even though, say, for instance, the Triton and at one point my ASR-10 both had sequencers in them, I always sequenced everything in the MPC because I just loved the sequencer that was inside of the MPC. And so this workflow now with the MPC software, I'm going to show you how to emulate that using Ableton as a sound module. Now, of course, you probably already know that over in Ableton that you could simply create a MIDI track, open the MPC software as a virtual instrument on that MIDI track, and then you could sequence in the MPC inside of Ableton. However, in that workflow, Ableton becomes the master. You have to set your tempo in Ableton, and then you basically have two sequencers running simultaneously side by side. But what you can't do is you can't sequence Ableton's instruments, the instruments that come with Ableton inside the sequencer of the MPC. So in this workflow, I'm going to show you how to use Ableton as a sound module, basically create sounds or use instruments that come stock with Ableton, but control them and sequence them in the MPC software. So to do that, we're going to go back over to the MPC software and set the MPC software up. So the first thing I'm going to do is just set my sequencer up. You need to make sure that you can see your inspector in the MPC software, and you can do that by clicking this little letter I down here in the bottom left corner of the screen. You see the inspector toggling. You can also use the shortcut I to toggle your inspector. At the top of the inspector, you see your sequence parameters, and then a little bit down below that, you see your track parameters. So first, I'm going to set my sequence up to 8 bars. I'm going to change my tempo to 90 beats per minute, and I'm actually going to work in 3/4 instead of 4/4, something a little bit different. Now, before I do anything else in the MPC software, there's another application that I need to bring into this mix. I need the MPC software to send MIDI to Ableton, and they're not connected right now. So I'm doing this on a Mac, and on all Macs, you have a software called Audio MIDI Setup. And as part of Audio MIDI Setup, you have something called an IAC driver, which will allow you to connect between different digital audio workstation or sound applications on your Mac computer. What I'm going to do is go to my Launchpad, and I'm going to type in AMS, which is short for Audio MIDI Setup. You see it comes up right here. And Audio MIDI Setup on a Mac shows you all connected audio devices and all connected MIDI devices. Right now, it's showing me the audio devices window. I don't need that, so I'm going to go to Windows and say Show MIDI Studio. And when you open up the MIDI Studio, you'll see all of the MIDI devices connected to your computer. They'll show up as kind of lit or highlighted. So you see my MPC One is showing as connected to my Mac. And you'll also see everything that has been connected to that Mac grayed out because they're not connected. You see my MPC One, you see my MPK 25, my MPC Live, MPC X, all of those things. But what's important here is the IAC driver. So this is grayed out. We need to activate it. We can activate it by double clicking on it to see its parameters. And inside of its properties, we just need to put a check in the box beside where it says devices online, and we can close this out. We can go ahead and quit that. So now let's set the MPC up to communicate via that IAC driver with Ableton. So I'm going to go into my preferences, Command, comma, and here under MIDI, I'm going to go under MIDI mapping, and you see have 4 ports here, 4 virtual ports. I'm going to connect port A to the IAC bus 1. And I'm going to say OK to that. All right. Before I go over to Ableton, I'm going to go ahead and set my tracks up over here. So on the first track, I'm just going to go ahead and name it drums, because I know that's going to be my drums. And I need it to not be a drum track. A drum track is a type of track in the MPC which allows you to bring in samples, and the samples you will assign to pads, and then those pads will record MIDI in your sequencer to trigger those samples. But in this case, we need to create a MIDI track. So you're going to click on this icon that looks like an old school 5-pin DIN connector, and now you created a MIDI track. When you create a MIDI track, down here under program, it says MIDI 001 and port. You'll see port A is showing that it's connected to the IAC bus 1. So that's good. And it's going to MIDI channel 1. Now MIDI carries 16 channels. So that will allow me to send 16 discrete MIDI channels over to Ableton to talk to 16 discrete instruments if I like. I'm going to go ahead and create another track. Click here. And I know this is going to be a pad sound that I'm going to use, and it's already set up to be a MIDI track because the original track was a MIDI track. It's assigned to port A, and I just need to change this to MIDI channel 2. And then I need to do the same thing for a third track, which is going to be my sub bass, basically an 808 sound. And I'm going to make sure it's going to port A. And this one, of course, will be, you guessed it, MIDI channel 3. So the MPC software is basically set up and ready to go. I'm going to hop over to Ableton and set Ableton up. In Ableton, I have the default 2 MIDI tracks, 2 audio tracks showing. I need a third MIDI track, so I'm going to control click and say insert a MIDI track, and I'm going to drag this over so it's all grouped with my other 2 MIDI tracks. And on each one of these tracks, I'm going to start with MIDI track 1. By default, they're set up to listen to all types of MIDI inputs that are coming into the computer, which is fine most of the time. But in this case, I want them to listen to that IAC driver that's coming from the MPC. But before I can even see it down here where it says all ends, I need to go into my preferences and find it. Under preferences, you're going to go to the link MIDI tab. And down here, you want to find input IAC driver. And you want to make sure that under the track column, that is checked to be on. And I close this out. Now, if I go to this all ends list, I'll see that the IAC driver is an option. So I want to assign this to IAC, and then it's still listening to all the MIDI channels on IAC. But this track specifically, I want to listen to MIDI channel 1. So my first track here in the MPC, this track is going to MIDI channel 1. And now this is the track that I want to receive it. This is where I'm going to load my drum sounds. So I'm going to go to the second track. And in this one, I'm going to do the same thing, IAC driver, and I'm going to put it on MIDI channel 2. And on this one, we're going to do IAC bus driver, and this one is going to be MIDI channel 3. So now I just need to put instruments on these tracks. I already have my user library open, and I'm actually right on the pad sound. So I'm just going to drag that over to track 2, which would be my pad sound. And then let's close this up and go to my drum rack. And my drum rack, I'm going to use this kit on track 1, and I'm going to use this sub rack on track 3. All right, so now let's see if the MIDI is going from the MPC over to Ableton. So I'm going to first select first track, and I'm going to arm it. It needs to be armed to receive the MIDI coming from the MPC. So the MPC is on track 1. And I know that the way I have those sounds set up on the rack, they're not going to show up in bank A. So I need to go to bank C. And then at bank C, I can find my sounds. So that's working. And if I go over to track 2, And if I scroll to track 2, if I play these pads, nothing's happening because the track is not armed. So I'm going to arm this track and I can hear my pad sound. And then finally, I'm going to arm track 3, go to track 3 on the MPC software, and bank C, and there are my 808 sounds. So now we're basically ready to start sequencing. Remember, we're going to record all the MIDI in the MPC software. So we're going to do all of the sequencing over in the MPC software. So I am going to now go back over into the MPC so you can see what's happening as we record the MIDI in. And I'm going to start with the pad sound. So I'm going to go to track 2, which is my pad sound. And you notice that when I did that, nothing happened. What I need to make sure is that you see track 3 is the only one that's armed, and I'm on track 2, which is sending MIDI to track 2. That's not going to work. So what I need to do is arm all of the tracks, and I can do that by holding down Command and clicking the record arm button on all of the tracks, and now they're all armed. So they'll all receive. That'll receive pad, that'll receive drums, and this one will receive sub bass sounds. So back to the pads. Playing like notes with these is not the easiest thing to do. So what I'm going to do is take advantage of a feature in the MPC software called Pad Perform. And in Pad Perform, I basically can have one pad to play a chord. So if I play a pad, I get a whole chord sound, right? So I have it set up under progressions. I have it set up in the key of F, in a natural minor F, and I'm using Guitar Jazz 1 chords. It's a preset in the MPC software. So what I'm going to do is something like this. You get the idea. So let's go ahead and track this in. Just like that, I have my chords in, and you'll notice over here in Ableton is just responding to the notes that are being played. There's no MIDI being recorded here. There are no clips in the session at all. So it's just a sound module at this point. All right, let's go to main and go to the drum track, and we'll add some quick drums here. Add some quick hi-hats. I'm going to use note repeat. Real simple drum pattern in there. And just to make the drums hit a little bit harder, I'm going to put a compressor on that track. I'm gonna come down here to my compressors, drag that over. So you get the idea. I've basically created all of my MIDI information is over here in the MPC. These are the drum, all the drum MIDI information that you see here. And for track 2, this is all the pad information. So you see those chords just by playing one pad at a time. I'm getting all this great chord information. And then on my 3rd track, I just have one little 808 bass. Did I put the 808 bass in? I haven't even recorded the 808 bass in. So let's record in the bass sound here. And I think I want to use, let's go to track 3. This note. I don't think that's in key or tuned right. So let me play it against the. Yeah, I need to tune that sample. So over here in the drum rack, it's selected here. I'm going to go to controls and tune it up a little bit. It's still not quite there. Let me go down 1. Let's try that now. Okay, so just like that, you basically have it set up. Here's the other part to this. If you want to keep it like this, every time you open the MPC software where you have all of your MIDI information, you have to open up the same live set. And that can be cumbersome. So I'll show you how to kind of save it all in one place, and then I'll show you a little bit better workflow. What we could do is we could go over here to the MPC software. And from the MPC software, go ahead and save our project. Command S. I'm going to save this to my desktop. I'm going to create a folder on my desktop, and I'm going to call it MPC Ableton Workflow. And I'm going to say do it. And I'm going to call this MPC Ableton. Did I spell Ableton right? I always spell it wrong. All right, and then I'm going to save that. So that project is saved. Now, I'm going to go over into Live, and I'm going to save this live set. I'm going to say File, Save Live Set As, and I'm going to go to my desktop, find that MPC to Ableton workflow here, go to list. And inside that, I'm going to save my live set. I'm going to call it MPC Ableton Live Workflow. Save. Now, on my desktop, I've got this folder, and I've got all the parts of that project in there. Again, that's very cumbersome that every time you open up the MPC software, you have to now open up the Ableton software. And then what do you do with that? At some point, it's going to end up in a full DAW anyway. So I want to show you how to track the MIDI from the MPC, all the MIDI information that's here. Track all of that MIDI over into Ableton, onto these tracks, right? Because it's basically triggering these sounds, and track the audio at the same time. And that way you'll have all that information here. And then if you wanted to continue to build on this in Ableton, you could. A lot of this workflow is in Ableton, so we need to do some things to set up Ableton. I'm going to leave these on for right now. I want to go to these audio tracks that I've created. I'm going to create one more audio track. And I'm going to go ahead and name these. I'm going to call this drums. I'm going to call this pad. Let's use a shortcut, Command R. I'm going to call this one 808. All right. Now, on these tracks, as you can see, they're listening to external input. They're actually listening to my microphone right now. So if I record it on them, it will record me talking. But I'm going to change it from external in to the names of the instruments coming from these tracks. So you'll see here, number one is the noise kit, which is exactly the instrument that's here. If I click on this, it's called the noise kit. I'm going to go back here to drums, change this to the noise kit. And then this one will be whatever the name of these pads are, which is this. We'll go back here, and that's the second one. And then this one, third one, will be my sub kit, right? So now it's listening to the audio coming from those tracks. To track this in, I need to use that IAC driver to communicate back and forth between these two devices again, but in a different way, not to just send track or note information, but to send MIDI clock information. So what I want to do is go back over into the MPC, hit Command comma, and here we want to synchronize. Basically, I want to start playback on the MPC, and I want it to also start playback and record, in this case, in Ableton. So I'm going to go to synchronize, and I am going to go to send, and I want it to send MIDI clock. If you watch this tutorial for how to do this with Logic, Logic doesn't slave to MIDI clock. It only slaves to MIDI time code. But Ableton will slave to clock, and clock sends tempo information, which is good. So we're going to say MIDI clock. We're going to change this to that IAC bus one, and we're going to say OK. Now in Ableton, we need to do some similar things. So we're going to go into Live, go into the Preferences. In the same place under your link MIDI, you want to go find the input for the IAC driver. You want to turn the sync on from that column. And you also want to click this disclosure triangle and tell it how to sync. So right now, I won't do anything because it says sync to none. We want to change this to MIDI clock because I'm sending clock from the MPC. All right, so now we're going to hit Tab to go to the arrangement view, and I'm just going to hold down Command, and I'm going to arm these audio tracks because I want them to record the audio, and these are already armed, so they're going to record in the MIDI. I'm going to leave the monitoring to off because I don't want it to monitor the sound twice, giving me phasing. So now the only thing I need to do is set this to external. I'm going to set it to 3/4 time because that's what my MPC sequence is in. I'm going to arm this, and I'm going to hit Tab to hop over into my arrangement view and start playback on the MPC. And there it is. I have 3 tracks. All the MIDI information is here. So I could continue to work with the MIDI inside of Ableton. And I have the audio tracks here printed also. And so I could now loop this out and continue to work inside of Ableton. I'll play it back for you. I'm going to disarm these MIDI tracks and mute them so they're not playing. Disarm my audio tracks also. Turn external off And now I need to set this tempo to 90 because Ableton's warped it, and so it'll be playing really fast. So I'm gonna set the tempo to 90 and start playback. That brief tempo delay you heard at the beginning probably was from Ableton picking up the tempo timing coming from the MPC. So there's a little bit of hesitance there. You could just chop that away. Just make sure you record enough so you have a full loop of whatever your arrangement was in the MPC. The last thing I want to mention is that everything I've demonstrated here on the Mac, and that IAC driver is something that's exclusive to the Mac operating system that comes installed with your Mac if you have it. However, if you are on a Windows computer, I found this site called Dialogue Audio, and on here it mentions that Windows operating systems don't provide virtual MIDI ports, which is what the IAC driver is, but there are some options. So it talks about loop MIDI and MIDI yoke. It actually recommends loop MIDI. I've never tried this, but it recommends it because it seems like the site is well maintained, and you can click here and it'll take you to that site where you could download the loop MIDI, and then you could try the same things on your PC. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If so, give it a like, subscribe to my channel, and of course, click on the bell so you'll be notified when I upload new content. As always, I appreciate you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.